Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to my monthly threat webinar. I'm Jon Clay, Vice President of Threat Intelligence here at Trend Micro. And this month I'm doing something a little different. I have invited a colleague of mine, Ed Cabrera, who is going to join me in a conversation about our 2022 predictions and all those types of topics. And we're just going to have kind of a fireside chat about all of these different topics. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat function and we'll hopefully get through any and all of your questions. If we don't get to your question, I apologize now, but we will contact you afterwards with hopefully an answer to your question. With that, I'm going to ask Ed to introduce himself. Ed?
Yeah, how you doing, everybody? I apologize. Hopefully I can get the video working here. And I think I did. My apologies. 1 second. Oh, no, it doesn't. It's not letting me. So, okay. My name is Ed Cabrera. I'm the Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Trend Micro. I've been at Trend for over 6.5 years. Before that, I spent 20 years in the United States Secret Service working in and leading many different cybersecurity programs there. Ultimately, before leaving, I was the Chief Information Security Officer there. So here at Trend, the last 6.5 years, I've had the deep pleasure, working with Jon Clay and the team, but also all the numerous threat research teams that we have within Trend Micro to really constantly monitor everything that we do and see from a threat and vulnerability perspective. So no, it's great to be here, Jon. Thanks for bringing me on, and can't wait to start our discussion.
Yeah, excellent, Ed, and appreciate you coming on today. So just to give you, the audience here, an understanding, every year Trend Micro goes to our internal threat research community and we ask them, what do you expect to see in the following year? And so we've been publishing prediction reports for the last, 10 or 15 years now. And it's always an interesting practice and project that comes up. And we obviously, Ed and I get involved very early on in working with the team and identifying it. We also give our own input to it. But this year for 2022, our predictions report, which you can find on our website, is called Toward a New Momentum, Trend Micro Security Predictions for 2022. And, it's always interesting to get the title kind of is something that we really think about pretty hard and try to put a title to it that makes kind of interesting sense to our audience. And Ed, I'd like to get your initial thoughts on why we named it Toward a New Momentum. Any thoughts around that?
That's a really good question. I think, everything that we talk about when it comes to cybersecurity is about momentum, right? And so I can't answer exactly the momentum piece. I think you can, but I'll tell you what my opinion is the fact that everything that we do deals with momentum, be it either matching or surpassing the threats that we face, right? It's all about the MO, right? The MO is so important in everything that we do. But Jon, you go ahead and finish that question.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is because of the pandemic that we've all been dealing with, and people have been probably not as I guess happy, so to speak, but we tried to frame this predictions report in a more positive light. So we tried to give and explain what organizations are doing in the different areas to actually do better around mitigating the threats, the different threats that we talk about. We obviously we give in the report information about, like whether it's ransomware or supply chain attacks or vulnerabilities. And we explain, what we think the malicious actors are going to do this year. But we also try to give you some ideas of what organizations are doing out there to help defend against these actors and the threats that we talk about. So that was kind of like, so we think new momentum, hopefully the momentum of of the pandemic is ending, so we get into the endemic stage of it, and then we can start momentum in terms of getting back out there and doing things, and hopefully meeting everybody that's our audiences at the events personally, versus all the virtual events that we've had to do over the last 2 years. So, but that was kind of the idea behind the title. But let's jump into the actual predictions. And the first prediction I wanted to highlight, and I'll just read it verbatim. Enterprises will ensure that cloud security basics are employed to defend their environments against a slew of cloud security threats and achieve a managed level of risk. So you can see that we're talking about what you can do there to prevent it. But Ed, when we talk about the cloud is becoming massive. Everybody seems to be moving to the cloud, whether it's a public cloud infrastructure or a hybrid cloud infrastructure. But many organizations, and we're seeing a rapid advancement of this. You just saw Microsoft earnings release, and their biggest earnings was around cloud. Azure, AWS is growing incredibly fast. But who's targeting the cloud infrastructure? What types of malicious actors are we seeing today that would target our customers' cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think what groups, well, you name the usual suspects, right? When it talks about the cloud, all the adversaries we face, be it from hacktivists to cyber criminals to nation state actors or state sponsors, all of which know that, hey, they want to be wherever we're at, or right. So when it talk about like cloud migration, cloud adoption, they're doing the same thing. So they're obviously, and they have been leveraging cloud to deliver highly automated and distributed attacks using the infrastructure that's available in the cloud. But now they're targeting the applications themselves that are actually being utilized in the cloud, right? So, and just so everybody realizes that we're talking about the cloud, but in essence, it's still the infrastructure and the services that you're getting from the cloud as a consumer, right? So whether it's bare metal or in the cloud, they're really, want to target that. So it could be ransomware groups, and it could be state sponsor groups. I think Team TNT, we write about in our prediction report, is really focusing on delivering crypto money, right? Vis-a-vis the cloud and so forth, right? Because it's highly distributed, a lot of processing power. And so you can imagine that's a great opportunity from their perspective, right? Is to leverage all this infrastructure to do some mining.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Bitcoin's price has dropped significantly from its highs, Ed. Does that affect these actors, do you think, or do they just, doesn't really matter? They'll take profit wherever they can. But I think one thing you did, before you answer, one thing you did hit hard on is that we are seeing crypto mining as one of the top threats when it comes to a cloud infrastructure attack, because of the resources capabilities of those systems that make up cloud infrastructure. But yeah, what do you think about with the price of fluctuation of cryptocurrencies? And this could even become with ransomware, because they get paid in cryptocurrency. But how does that the fluctuation of those affect attacks out there, you think?
Well, you know what? It's when you think about it, it's just a line of business, right? So ransomware attacks, traditional data breach where they're stealing data, parsing and reselling it. This is all about them trying to maximize profits, get the highest ROI, return on investment, right? So this is truly criminal enterprise 101. And so yeah, I mean the price affects it. But then they realize it, just like we all do. And then some of us, investing in cryptocurrency, realize that yes, now it's an asset class by itself, and there's going to be some volatility associated with it, and then has proven to, even there's dips that continue to rise. And so absolutely, from their perspective, this is just another way for them to monetize these attacks, right? And so you actually see it even going beyond, where from a crypto perspective, they're going after and targeting wallets themselves. And so this has become a whole class of type of attacks all by themselves.
Yeah, go where the money is stored, right?
Exactly.
But, and it also could bring up that if the price goes down, they actually have to do more attacks to make the same amount of money. So we could actually see an increase in crypto mining attacks just because of the reason, because they don't make as much, so they've got to do more, right?
Yep. I mean, and it's interesting. It's a lot of little nuances, and even my son is, investing in NFTs and so forth, and he's telling me about the gas prices, and I'm like, what are you talking about, gas prices? So all of this is all interconnected, right? So if the prices come down, or with crypto, that means that you can then use technically less processing power to mine more coins, right? And so it's almost like that dollar cost averaging, where you're actually investing on the dip, right? Knowing that it's, or hoping that it's going to go up. So it's a unique situation we're having and we're seeing with crypto.
Yeah. Now, as you said, the cloud is part of just part of the infrastructure. But when they do attack the cloud infrastructure, where are we seeing the majority of these attacks occur? So where can our audience, if they have a cloud infrastructure, where should they be looking to identify if an attack has occurred or not?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, any cloud infrastructure for them that is obviously outwardly facing, right? Any exposed infrastructure or web applications that's where you should really start first. Obviously, that also goes in line with what are your, crown jewels. So like everything else, what are the critical applications, databases, and data that your company is utilizing in the cloud, and then sort of work out from there. But definitely from a prioritization piece, anything that's exposed on the internet creates incredible opportunities, right? Especially where we see these constant vulnerabilities that are being disclosed, and then and we'll talk about that challenge here in a minute. But this is where I would think I would focus first.
Yeah, I agree, Ed. And obviously, S3 buckets have been probably one of the biggest offenders, so to speak, or devices that have been attacked. And most of the time, though, those have been misconfigurations, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. Misconfigurations and just complacency, right? So there is lack of password protection or lack of changing default password infrastructure associated with those S3 buckets. I mean, all of this, and it's a challenge because, we talk about ghost IT. Now we're talking about ghost data or ghost databases, right? So because a lot of times organizations, because it's so easy to spin up instances and accounts within your major public providers, it's a big challenge for organizations to maintain that control and visibility, right? Because now you have some division, some group that ends up going, okay, they're wanting to test some of their applications, and they're going to use possibly real data or this or that or the other, or they're just spinning up an S3 bucket to store stuff, but they're not doing the right things and just the basics to protect that bucket.
Yeah. We haven't talked about DevOps though. Obviously, a lot of organizations are now developing applications, rapid development, whatever it is, APIs, all of those we're starting to see also being targeted, aren't we?
No, absolutely. So you look at the DevOps tools and pipelines are being targeted. And so, I mean, that creates, again, we talk about, supply chain issues associated with SolarWinds, as general applications that are actually being utilized by multiple organizations and sectors and stuff like that, where they could pivot. Now it's when we're talking about from a DevOps perspective, now we actually see it with attacks targeting Kubernetes and so forth. So on the automation side of the house, so any common applications or services that are sort of native to public cloud, they become great opportunities because again, they can then pivot and from there to target customers.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things that the biggest challenge that a lot of organizations have is this is all new technology, and anytime new technology is introduced in an organization, unless you fully understand it and not just how to implement it, but also the security components of it. So organizations in our, from what we see is that education of whether it's their developers, whether it's their implementers, whatever it might, cloud architects, definitely have to ensure they understand what are the security ramifications of implementing a cloud component, right?
Yep. You think about it, it really gets down to the basics, make sure it's well architected. You have a good framework, encrypting and patching. All of this is critical. I mean, we know this, or I think sometimes we get, our customers get lulled into this false sense of security. Well, by thinking that cloud is automatically secure, and we know that's not the case, right? And so having that sort of process piece. We talk about people, process, and technology, but that process piece on the back end to say, if you're going to the cloud, this is how you need to do it in a secure manner.
Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit. We recently had a global risk survey that we did, and 92% of the respondents, and this was 5,000 plus IT professionals and executives across 26 countries, all said, 92% said that they're concerned about ransomware in the future. So let's shift over to ransomware, Ed. What are some of the changes that we've seen most recently with ransomware actors and the attacks that they're perpetrating against the audience here?
Well, the digital extortion, business model is pretty scary. But what we've seen here recently, let's back up a little bit. We saw a shift between 15 and 2016 from going from blocker variant to crypto. And now we're seeing a shift where it's really much more targeted, and we're seeing double extortion types of attacks. And what do I mean by that? Well, single model extortion attacks is just saying, just like it sounds, if you don't pay, I'm not going to give you the keys to decrypt your data. Double extortion is saying, okay, we're not going to do or drop ransomware at the very beginning of this attack chain. We're going to drop it at the very end. And what does that mean? That means that they're going to do everything they possibly can, like they would do in a traditional data breach, is gain a foothold, escalate privileges, identify critical data, move as deep as they possibly can to have the highest impact, and then exfiltrate copies of data, and then encrypt the remaining copies inside the organization. And so it's quite simple. If you don't pay, not only we're not going to give you the keys, but we're not going to, or we're going to dox you. We're going to release all this sensitive information on the internet. So this double extortion scheme and we're predicting that it's going to just go into this triple and quadruple. So as much as they can possibly to go deeper, have the highest impact, because for them, deeper means higher impact, means higher payout, right? And so this is just another way of making sure that they have the best means to monetize their attack.
Well, and we also are seeing very much less consumer-based ransomware, and it's almost all targeting businesses now, right?
Absolutely. Because again, back to the mid 2000s, this was consumer-based drive-by type of an attack, and now they realize that if they're much more deliberate and in their attack, that's why we actually see sort of a change in numbers, and I think we're going to be seeing that coming through the end of this year, coming up when we're going to release a report soon, but that they're going to see a lower amount of ransomware attacks, overall. But we also know that there's an increase in impact and the amount of payouts, right? So the amount of the payouts.
Yeah, and one of the things we also see is, and obviously is concerning, is that in many ransomware attacks today, it's not the ransomware group isn't doing the entire attack, right? It's multiple groups now that are doing these attacks. Let's talk a little bit about access as a service, or these initial access brokers that are coming into play now, who are doing the initial access. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating evolution. And forgive me for even appreciating the evolution side of it. But we talk about how the criminal underground's really focused and started off with very centralized models, and you went to one site and you could do it all. And then over time, because of law enforcement actions and everything else like that, it's got distributed and fractured and very highly specialized. And so this model now has turned again, you have a crime as a service. So now you have end-to-end providers, ransomware as a service providers, delivering these services for less than technical cyber criminals. Now they've taken that next evolution, and it's this affiliate program. It's similar to what you would see in Amazon, right? And so it's not, when you buy something from Amazon, it's not just from Amazon, right? You're buying it from Amazon sellers. And so this affiliate program that has sprung up, you see this type of challenge for even from a law enforcement perspective, but also from obviously defense, because these affiliates are gaining, pretty much a lot of capability themselves, and are able to then really do these high consequence, high impact attacks. And it's not necessarily the ransomware as a service provider, it's the affiliates associated with it. So these are the challenges that we're going for, but this is how they're able to scale, right? The more capable these affiliates become, the more impact globally they can have, targeting companies and departments and agencies.
Right. And I think we saw it with this in play in the Colonial Pipeline attack, because I believe they figured out it was actually an affiliate who probably did that attack and didn't worry about who they were targeting. They were just going for the money. And unfortunately, unintended consequences came through. And then next thing you know, the governments got involved, right?
No, absolutely. So you even see sort of this sort of this backing away from like the individuals that are actually running this ransomware as a service, and sort of backing away from that type of attack, saying, "Hey, listen, we're not culpable here. I mean, they're the ones that are just using our infrastructure," and and so it's a strange, really dynamic that we're seeing, that as these attacks happen, is who's really in charge? Is it the affiliate, or is it the ransomware as a service provider?
Right. Yeah, and one of the things that we're seeing inside our customers today is this. Again, we're seeing different groups inside. So you have initial access groups that do the initial access into the organizations, and they're using pretty much the same tactics that nation states have used in the past, whether it's credentials that they've stolen, vulnerabilities that they're exploiting, phishing emails that they're doing to employees. But all they're trying to do is gain access to the network, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, and I apologize, I almost didn't even address the initial access market, right? So that, again, going back to what are the opportunities for cyber criminals, and then you have these affiliates and or these groups within the cyber criminal undergrounds that actually focus on specializing, just establishing and creating initial access. And they're not doing anything but selling that access, right? So in other words, the equivalent is, hey, I stole the card key and or the physical key to this business, and I didn't steal anything, but I'll sell it to you, and then you can go in there and steal whatever you want, right? But you got to pay me first this flat rate, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, this initial access thing is and we're seeing that, and we sort of predict that it's going to be going up even more, because emotet is now on the rise. And so in 2022, we figure right now toward the tail end of 2021, emotet, which was really big on providing that backdoor access after initial compromise, is now on the upswing. So we really see that from a ransomware perspective, and these types of sort of these similar trends, that we're actually going to see more attacks out.
Yeah, so it seems like in most cases in a ransomware attack, obviously ransomware is the last stage. It's the last thing they're going to do because it's the most visible. But the early warnings that our audience can look for, Ed, in these attacks, what are some of those? Obviously, tools are a big one, right? These native tools that a lot of organizations use themselves are being used by the criminals in many different ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at ransomware attacks, it's now shifted where, since it's a post-breach attack, like you said, it's that last phase where they're dropping the ransomware and or crypto mining, or both type of malware. They are essentially taking the same TTPs, as traditional data breach, right? To the initial access. So obviously, any kind of malicious behavior or anomalous behavior on sign-ins or attempts or sign-on attempts, so to speak, reconnaissance and scanning phases. And then you talk about once they gain a foothold, it's incredibly important because a lot of what they're doing is following that same model where then the dropper malware ends up dropping additional malware. So they're going through their stages to gain the foothold. So the traditional detection capabilities and what you're talking about, the tools is, yeah, tool usage or tool abuse is one of those things because they see it as living off the land. They see it as hiding in plain sight, right? So if they do it during the same working hours and they utilize the same tools that are actually, present within a network, then they realize that they can possibly avoid detection for a little bit longer before they start exfiltrating data and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it was interesting. One of our audience members put in the chat that sometimes decrypt keys are also backdoors. So obviously one of the end games of a ransomware attack is to maintain persistence inside that network, right? So they could actually then become an access broker themselves, potentially, if that's what they want. But certainly the maintenance phase of an attack is always interesting to me because they start then, how can they maintain access in these networks, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So since we're seeing crypto mining malware being dropped at the same time as they're dropping ransomware, it's really goes to show you that, again, the longer they can maintain persistence, the more money they can make. So
yeah. So one of the questions we regularly get is, should I pay the ransom? You obviously, Ed, you were in the Secret Service. You dealt with law enforcement for many, many years. Thoughts on paying criminals for what they're doing?
It's always no. In other words, no, you shouldn't. But right, there's always a but, right? Unfortunately, organizations are I think less so, right? The more prolific the ransomware and digital extortion becomes, the more prepared, unfortunately, these organizations have to be, or they've been attacked and then they have to respond and mitigate. So I think, ideally, no. In a perfect world, you don't want to pay because what does it do? It just perpetuates the scheme. It perpetuates you as a victim, right? Because now you've proven that, hey, you're willing to pay. But I completely understand the challenge is that they're becoming much more effective in the ransomware attack, and they're going deeper. So one of the first things that they do, they go after backups. Because one of the things that we've always said, hey, backup. Right. But if they're targeting the backups right out of the gate, then that poses a huge challenge.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some of the things that customers can do, audience can do to mitigate a ransomware attack as much as possible these days, Ed?
I think the mitigation, unfortunately, is on the front end, right? I mean, this is where if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So this is, again, the speed at which these attacks happen are a huge challenge. Now, mind you, at the same time, I say speed is not your friend. You have to make it your friend, so to speak. But since now they're doing this double extortion scheme where they really want to do this post-breach and it's the last thing they want to do. So I think to mitigate these ransomware attacks, again, still, backup, right? That is one of the things that you have to do, 2 copies in different formats and then air gaps sort of is really what we always talk about. But then it's, okay, what's your playbook? You've got to have a ransomware playbook. If you don't have that, because you have to address the entire impact of what a ransomware attack is, because you have all these different stakeholders, because the impact is immediate, right? And it's immediate to operations. Problem is operational risk. And so your playbook has to really be focused on mitigating that operational risk. So.
Yeah, and one of the predictions we're making as part of this is that they're going to target the servers more than endpoints anymore, right? The employee is going to be part of the initial access, but the servers are what they're going to target with the ransomware. Because again, if I can take out a business critical system that helps run day-to-day operations, yada yada, or it's critical to the business, maybe it's an exchange server or an AD server or something, they're able to cripple that organization and then potentially make them need to buy or pay the ransom much faster. But so yeah, obviously server mitigations. A couple of things that I see, Ed, in talking with our support organization, our incident response teams. First and foremost, credential theft is used tremendously in these attacks. So hardening up your administrator accounts, hardening up your critical application accounts, database accounts is going to go very far in mitigating a lot, right? So multi-factor authentication, like you mentioned, regular password or a password program or something can help in that area. Another one is obviously patching and making sure you're using the latest advanced detection technologies. So enabling machine learning, enabling artificial intelligence, behavior monitoring, those will go far in being able to identify and block the attack from occurring as well. Any other areas you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. Even though we still see the human behind the keyboard, the social engineer attacks still the primary vector, but more and more we're seeing this time to exploit, right? These vulnerabilities that are actually being disclosed. Before, it would take 45 days or 30 days on average where you would actually see it possibly in the wild or a proof of concept created on a disclosed vulnerability. Now we're talking about hours, if not days. And so this time to exploit increases the risk. So when you're talking about vulnerability management, now you have to have your own playbook, so to speak, on associated with your vulnerability management. You got to be able to prioritize very quickly what systems you need to patch.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Ed, because you kind of led us right into our third prediction, which is security teams will need to be well equipped to contend with malicious actors intent on repurposing older vulnerabilities, which we tend to call N day, and as in Nancy day, and exploiting newly found ones in a matter of days, if not hours. So, the recent Log4j one was actually a 0 day. And I think in 2021, we had over 70 0 days that were used in attacks, which is a record number from previous years. And so I think, one of our predictions, we're going to continue to see that. But let's talk about patch management, because obviously this is a critical area for organizations, but it's also one of the hardest areas for a lot of organizations, because you look at Microsoft, almost every Patch Tuesday now has 90 to 100 security patches associated with it. And that's just Microsoft. Think about all the vendors that these organizations have to contend with and deal with, all the security patches that they're dealing with. You obviously can't patch everything. So let's talk about patch management and maybe a strategy for our customers and the audience here on how they can improve their patch management practices.
Well, you said it exactly right. It's to defend all, it's to defend none, right? I believe it's a quote or somewhat to Clausewitz. But the whole idea is that you cannot patch everything, right? It's just physically impossible, and it just turns out to be a waste of time. Because let's look at actually the depth and breadth of the amount of vulnerabilities that are disclosed each year. But then we also know that the ones that are actually, there's only a subset or smaller percentage that are actually then found in the wild, right? In other words, they have had their exploit kits created and they're actually seen in the wild. So it's a small subset. And so what does that mean? You basically have to do this prioritization activity way before everything else happens. You have to understand what your crown jewels, what are you protecting? What is the critical data, the systems, the hardware, for your organization, and understand the vulnerabilities associated with those operating systems or applications at any given moment. So that's where you got to focus first, right? Focus on the area that can do you the most harm. But also that's a challenge, right? You take the healthcare, the ones that can do you the most harm is usually the ones that can do us as patients harm, meaning it could be medical devices, it could be testing systems in a hospital, and they're very difficult to bring down. So the other thing that we do is the prioritization piece is very critical. And then these real-time systems, which is tough to be able to take them out of production to then patch, is taking advantage of vulnerability, what we call
Virtual patching.
sort of applying virtual patching, applying that virtual tourniquet, right? So understanding that, hey, whatever you have that might be vulnerable, you take the ports and protocols that are associated with it, you lock those down so you minimize and or eliminate the actual exploitability of that particular, that vulnerability or of that software or application. So that's where you really need to focus is prioritization, and then what can you do in the meantime to give you more time? Because the virtual patching, all that does, just like on in a car accident or in a battlefield, whatever you want to call it, having that virtual patching right off the bat extends your ability to survive later on. So to be able to then apply the true patch when it's available.
Yeah. So, when I think about it, Ed, you put that really good framework there. When you look at when something gets disclosed, right? When a vulnerability gets disclosed, you obviously got to think about, how critical is this application, or if it's part of an operating system, how prevalent is that in my business critical systems? And then secondly, though, what happens in many cases with these is a proof of concept gets created very quick, if not right at the same time. And so one of the things that we've seen is a lot of proof of concept exploits of vulnerabilities have been used in these attacks moving forward. So think about, first and foremost, obviously, any vulnerability that's being exploited in the wild, those are absolutely got to patch those, right? Or virtually patch them immediately, right? Second, though, is look at the ones that have proof of concepts, because those are more likely to be weaponized than one that's just been found. But then thirdly, I would look at what are the critical enterprise applications that many organizations use out there in the world. And those, if you're using those, then those are also high priority ones. But what was interesting, Ed, I got, and many of the audience may not know this, but we have some network IPS solutions through our products called Tipping Point, and our 0-day initiative, which is our bug bounty program. We receive bugs from 10,000 plus researchers out there in the world who submit bugs to our 0-day initiative, get paid the bounty for the bug, and then we work with the vendor on the back end to make sure they get a patch published. One of the things, though, the benefit of having this program is that we start working on a virtual patch immediately once we receive the bug. And in 2021, I just got the data back. For all of the vulnerabilities that bugs that got submitted, we had 105 days of pre-disclosure filters, IPS filters for our Tipping Point customers, meaning they had a virtual patch on average 105 days ahead of the public patch for the customer. So that's a huge benefit, I think, for a lot of these organizations if they do implement. And then I would also comment about your comment about the medical devices. There's a lot of devices inside organizations like medical devices that struggle with having the ability to run a security agent on the device itself. And that's where we're seeing a network-based IPS or a network scanner that can identify an exploit coming into that device and actually blocking it from executing at that point. So those are some ideas as well, I think, right, Ed?
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't say enough. Leveraging over 3,000 independent researchers, right? To be able to really sort of stress test and identify those vulnerabilities, and then be able to have that pre-disclosure protection is pretty invaluable.
Yeah. So, I know a lot of our audience here are probably small businesses, and one of our predictions is for small business. And it says malicious actors will continue to think of smaller businesses as easy prey, but cloud-heavy SMBs will come prepared with security measures that can fend off commodity attacks. So, the commodity attacks is interesting. We're going to publish, we just published a news release that in 21, we blocked 94 billion threats that targeted our customers. So there's obviously a massive number of threats that are targeting out there. But let's talk about small business for a minute. Why does a cloud-heavy SMB likely have improved protection against some of these commodity threats than, say, someone who doesn't have that?
I would say, unfortunately, right, small businesses are on the front line, right? And then they struggle having the resources, technical and human capital resources, to be able to help defend themselves, right? So I think this, albeit we like to talk almost, talk down, unfortunately, the whole notion of commodity attacks, because we think of, well, that's less sophistication and this and that and the other. And so, but to a small business, these commodity type attacks are what they're dealing with on a daily basis. And so, the only thing I think when I think of small businesses having to deal with that is building out your network, right? The more you have to bring to bear, identifying key vendors, being able to leverage your vendors, their services behind the scenes, but also obviously managed security service providers and so forth, being able to force multiply, and you can only do that by having a strong network. And I would say, even going further and say, having that law enforcement relationship. Every organization should have that law enforcement relationship, be it with the Secret Service, the FBI, you name it. But the whole idea is having that network and being connected, because that's the only way you get stronger together, right, in a collective manner.
Yeah, and I also think when we talk about cloud heavy, what we mean by that, if you're not familiar, is that in the past, a lot of the security solutions were on-premise. You had to get the solution on-premise. You installed it on your devices, and you managed it. You had to deal with the patches. You had to deal with any updates. And so what we're seeing is the shift to a SaaS approach, software as a service approach, where now the vendor who supplies your security, your SaaS version of security, they'll maintain the product for you. They maintain any patches. They initiate the updates to if there's new technology, because this industry is one of the few industries that I've seen that is constantly innovating and coming up with new technologies to prevent the attacks. And if you don't, and we talked about this before in the ransomware discussion, that if you don't enable these new advanced things, you're definitely more at risk. So moving to a SaaS-based approach, and again, that not just your security applications, but all of the applications that you run as a small business, if you can move it to a SaaS version, you're going to be much better off and more capable and more prepared to deal with the threats that target those applications and the vulnerabilities associated with those applications that happen all the time. But Ed, you talked about MSPs, and I think that's probably the bigger role that a small business needs to think about, is bringing on a partner who can manage the item for them, right?
No, absolutely. It's like it goes along with really moving to SaaS tools, because of the fact that now you're able to then leverage really it's hard enough from the human capital side to be able to recruit, train, and maintain cybersecurity professionals. We already know that there's a skills gap, over 500,000 strong across the United States. And that's the challenge, right? How do they be able to then, if they can't hire them and maintain them, who can they go to and partner with to be able to do that? And the only thing I would say is, all MSSPs are not created equal. You really have to dig deep, because you really want to understand what are their capabilities, what tools are they utilizing, and you need to be able to assess their effectiveness too as well. So you need to stay on top of them. It's a challenge for small businesses, you just can't set it and forget it, is what I'm saying. Is that MSSPs are great, but it's this collective approach, and you got to trust but verify with everything.
Yeah, and even we're seeing even very large enterprises go with managed services or managed XDR, mainly because these vendors who supply those, like ourselves, we have the threat hunters that are trained and have been doing it for many years, and that's an area we talked about. How can you get an early warning, or how can you identify the attack at the early stages? And that really comes down to more threat hunting capabilities, right?
No, absolutely. So to be proactive or left of boom, so to speak, you really need to have really tap into the right tools, right? You talk about our XDR program and having this, holistic across, approach when you're looking at identifying threats as they become and rise up, and get them at in the beginning, right? So be able to thwart an attack at the earliest stage possible. And so being proactive, it enables you to do that. And so the challenge is that how do you have, because this is a skill set, right? And how these threat hunters to be able to, if you can have threat hunters that are on the payroll, so to speak, but if you're not having active attacks, your skill set might get rusty. So if you're, that's the upside of, an enabling an MSSP or an XDR services. So because now you're leveraging those individuals that are actually doing it on a daily basis, if not hourly basis. And so their skill sets even at a higher level.
Yeah. We talked about MSPs, and I just wanted to highlight, we saw some software supply chain attacks recently targeting MSPs, but also targeting open source. Let's talk a little bit about the software supply chain, because that seems to be a topic that's of interest to a lot of people these days.
Yes, software supply chain, right? For how long did we talk about? We still talk about it, is the hardware supply chain issue and risk, right? Chips and where they're being developed, and essentially hard coded or hardware backdoors and so forth. Now we have to deal with software supply chain, which was something that was already coming along, right? But now I think we're in such a challenge when it comes to software. I forget the percentage, and I hate to say it because I hate to misquote it, but there's a good percentage of open source code that's behind a lot of proprietary software, right? So the libraries and everything else is behind the scenes. A lot of developers, instead of reinventing the wheel, really utilize open source whenever they can. And so becomes a challenge, because now, just like targeting MSSPs is, hey, you're not just targeting an MSSP, you're targeting an MSSP to go after all the customers. Same thing with the software supply chain. You're not just targeting a software company, you're targeting all the users of their software, right? And so you're able to leapfrog and then force multiply your attack. And so it's a huge challenge now, and from a supply chain perspective.
Yeah, and what's interesting is a lot of organizations utilize, you talked about that open source, and people may not realize our Cloud One platform, we actually have a partnership with Sneak, who scans open source for vulnerabilities. So one of the ways to mitigate this is, if you are doing software development, and you use open source, you have a tool now through us that can scan that open source for any known vulnerabilities, and you can mitigate them before you actually publish your code out there. But one of the things that they've, in terms of mitigation, Ed, they're starting to come up is the software bill of materials, right? And many organizations are starting to look at supplying software bill of materials. What is that? Just so the audience understands it a little bit.
Well, a software bill of materials is almost equivalent to what you would pick up on any food aisle, right? You pick up a box and you have the ingredients listed on the side. You also have the calorie count and so forth. So you actually have a listing of what's actually in that product, in that food product. This is essentially that, right? This is really breaking down what are the ingredients to that software. And the same reason why that label is on there is to help consumers be better educated in what food that they're buying. It's the same thing here. It's to enable the education of those buying software, right? So if you have a poorly written, and this is all being developed, and this is all really, moving forward. There is, I believe, ISO standards that are associated with the SBOMs, but we're, it's one of these things that I think we're going to see more and more being required at the procurement phase of any opportunity, right?
Yeah, and really what it is a lot of organizations that supply software, you don't know that they're using third party or a open source code. So what a software bill of materials is going to be is more to help organizations understand what all components make up that source code. And so they're aware that, for example, Log4j, is it being used in this application? Well, if you know about it ahead of time, then you realize, oh yeah, I better get that patched, get that patch out there, or get the patch from the vendor who uses Log4j in their application. So we'll see that. But certainly, I think, as you said, software vendors will be targeted in 22 just to build a bigger victim option, right, for these malicious actors, because if they can compromise the software update process, and whether it's adding a backdoor malware to it, so then they get access to their customer base.
It's all about return on investment, right? If they can work smarter, not harder, to be able to maximize their profits, obviously they're going to do it. And this is one of those areas that it's been proven that they could do it.
And the zero trust model seems to be one that may be coming up in this area as well, because again, if you don't trust anything, and but you verify it, that's probably the big one, right? Can I verify that update is accurate and it's not compromised? So. Last one, I know we're running out of time. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We did have a question though, Ed. I know I talked a little bit about network IPS for medical devices, but our audience member asked about mitigation strategies for medical devices. They probably obviously work in an environment that has medical devices. So what are some tips for this person on how they can secure that environment a little better?
Well, I think the challenge is right. A lot of medical devices have older operating systems, let's say that, and hopefully they are not out of life or out of service operating systems. And so they become really big targets, right? So I guess the first thing that I would be doing is having a proper inventory, right? What are the operating systems and applications that are running on all the medical devices that I have, and having this awareness of making sure, finding opportunities to update those versions if possible, working with those vendors of the medical devices, and making sure if there's an opportunity to be able to update those operating systems, do so, and do so immediately. Secondly, is then understanding the connection, right? Are these devices critical to be connected to the internet, right? Or can they be standalone? Can they be air gapped? Because it's all about compensating controls at this point, right? It's about doing what you can do, because if you cannot update those versions, you cannot patch those medical devices, or it gives you a challenge because, hey, there are some life-threatening services that these devices are doing, right? And so they can't have downtime. Then you have to understand what network are they on, and then monitoring and closing that network, right? Eliminating obviously IPSs around and segmented into these networks, right? Air gap is the key, but if you can't air gap them, definitely from an architecture perspective, you definitely want to have some IPS systems, next-gen IPS systems surrounding those medical devices.
Yeah, and we actually have an initiative called TX1. It's a company that we spun off recently, but they do a lot of OT ICS protection capabilities solutions for that area as well. So you might want to take a look at that. You mentioned just now that inventory, and so one of the terms that's being out there is attack surface management or attack surface discovery. And I know we're doing some things in that area with our solutions. Our Vision One console can actually give them some information about assets that they have inside and devices they have inside their organizations, whether they're running our software or not. But let's talk a little bit about that strategy, so to speak, as we move into 22. How good, what kind of things can an organization do there?
Well, it's fundamental, right? It's a fundamental concept to physical and cybersecurity, right? I mean, the idea that if you cannot see it, you cannot protect it. So having this idea of what is out there at any given moment is critical, from IoT devices, industrial IoT devices, to your regular IT systems. If you cannot see it, you cannot protect it. So first and foremost is engaging this capability through the services or software they already have. But also then, if you cannot or you don't feel good, then bring on other additional services to be able to give you that proper visibility into your attack surface. Because it's ultimately, risk is that connection between the threat, the vulnerability, and that asset, right? I mean, ultimately that, it's the combination of all three that really has the problem, right? If you had an asset that doesn't have vulnerabilities and or threats against it, then it's a safe place. But if you have an asset that is vulnerable and there's active threats going and targeting, that asset or those types of assets, then that's a huge challenge for you. So definitely, first and foremost, identify your attack surface.
Yeah, and I would say the first area would be your external facing devices, as you said before, right? So, whether you're
Absolutely.
using Shodan or one of the other tools that out there, just scan your IP space and identify every single IP that's open to the internet, and then analyze each of those to identify, does it need to be externally connected? If it does, then start looking even further, what ports and services and what accounts are open on that thing, and make sure you're doing as much as you can to minimize that. So, but Ed, I think we're coming up to the end of the hour. I want to thank Ed Cabrera for helping me today with this monthly threat webinar. Ed, any last comments you have for the audience?
No, I think we don't want to, give you all the doom and gloom. The predictions are absolutely that the attacks will be coming, and then depending on wherever we're at, they're going to be at from an adversary perspective. However, the good news is that there is that much, I would say even more so, innovation and coming from those that provide you the services and the products and so forth that helping you enable and protect you. So definitely reach out to us with any questions, be it around threats, vulnerabilities, and obviously products, but anything that you have concerns with, please contact us.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to you.
Son, I hope I didn't just
yeah, lots of new capabilities and items coming out. Our cybersecurity platform approach is really changing the industry. But thank you for joining us today. Again, if you can get access to our predictions report just off of our website. But all of our content there, whether it's blogs and reports and research reports, are available there for you to get access to. 99% of the time, they're not gated, so they're free to everybody. But thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you again in February. At the end of February, I'll be doing another monthly threat webinar. That one, I'm probably going to go and talk about the criminal underground. We talked a little bit about that today, but I want to dive deep into what's going on in the criminal underground. How is it made up? Who's it made up by? What are some of the key things that they're doing in there to target organizations out there? But again, everybody, thanks for joining. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.